Hey, good people, it's Paul here. Today marks 7 years since the earthquake in Christchurch, and I was reminded this morning by Facebook memories of a post I put up on the day saying I'm safe. But coincidentally, I was chatting with a client yesterday, uh, and we got onto the subject of the earthquake, and I'd forgotten what date it was. I didn't realise it was the day before the 22nd of February, so strange that it came up in conversation just yesterday, but I was telling her some of the journey of that day, and she was very interested to hear about my experiences. But it got me thinking about, okay, where am I now? 7 years later, what's changed for me? Have I changed as a person, and so on? And it got me thinking about how I've managed the emotions relating to a trauma, going through a trauma such as an earthquake. Because there is trauma, and I think as a survivor of an earthquake, somebody who got out relatively unscathed, there's a lot of guilt that you carry from that, and I'll just talk about that in a moment. But the day itself, I was in the city centre, and I worked for one of the bigger telecom companies, and they have actually one of the safest buildings in the city, but it's connected via a corridor to another building, and I was on the third floor, and the corridor goes from the third floor of our building to the other building, and one building's shaking this way and the other building's shaking this way, and so our floor just got shaken to shit, and the ceilings just rained down on us. So when you feel the earthquake coming, it feels like there's a train going past, and it sort of rumbles, and then if it picks up, if it's a real one, a big one, then everything starts to shake, and you don't get time to get anywhere. You've just basically got to find a place to hide. So we all jumped under our desks, and I just remember the ceilings raining down, all the aircon units, the ceiling, suspended ceiling all came down, the lighting all came down, and the place was just covered in dust, and you couldn't really see anything. I remember shouting somebody's name out to hope that they were okay. And they were. So we all left the building in an orderly manner and went out into the devastation that was happening in the streets. And as we walked out of the city, I just remember the road was just, as well as rubble and dust, the road was just covered in liquefaction that had come up through the floor. It was like just a pool of muddy, silty, salty water. And we had to wade our way out. We had to take our shoes and socks off and wade through it. And I also remember walking past a car that was just covered in bricks, completely squashed with bricks. And only in hindsight afterwards, I thought, I didn't even know if there's anyone in the car. I was sort of just wandering around, wandering out of the city, with the goal of getting to the house to get to my friend's place. It's funny how you react when you're going through something like an earthquake or something like that, because you don't know how you're going to react until it happens. And I think I went into left brain organised mode. Okay, we've got to get out of the city, we've got to get to the house, make sure we've got sleeping bags and food packed. I went into survival type mode, and so I was helping somebody leave the city. We've got our friends out of the city because there was no electric, so they had a daughter and we had to get them to somebody else's place to stay the night, and then I stayed at a mate's house. But I remember walking out of the city and back home. It was about 20 minutes, and walking up the drive to our house. It's a weatherboard house at the front and the side, and so you can see the weatherboard. It looked relatively unscathed, and so I thought, okay, doesn't look too bad. And then as I walk up the drive, we had this brick wall, which was the wall and window to my bedroom, and I remember seeing my bed through the wall that wasn't there anymore, and the wall had come down. So the house was devastated. Then I walked in the back door, and I was hit by the smell of tequila and soy, because I had this beautiful bottle of tequila on a top shelf, a bottle of champagne on the other end, and all the condiments in the cupboards had all come out. And so the house just stunk of tequila and soy, and it's not a good mix. So what I did, I think, when I got to the house was just threw a load of stuff in the car and then made it to my mate's place and stayed there the night. And so that's how we got out of the city. But it wasn't until that night when we managed to find a phone line that worked, the only phone line that worked. There was no mobile service, there was no internet. And and I found an analog phone, so we plugged the phone in and I called my mum back in the UK. And it wasn't until the moment when mum answered, it was 2 a.m. or something over there, and so I'd woken her up. And I didn't want to worry her because I didn't want her to wake up to the news the next day and just see what's happened, so I wanted to let her know. And I said, Mum, I don't want you to worry, don't worry, but there's been an earthquake here in Christchurch. And she said, are you okay? And it was at that moment that I completely fell apart, and I just flooded tears. And it's like after the earthquake, it's like I just stored all the emotion. I just compartmentalized all the emotion and said, right, I'm going to put you away. I'm just going to put you away for a little while until I need you to come out. And whilst I sort everything else out, this is how I handled the trauma of going through that event. I put it into a compartment, locked the door, and then accessed that later. As soon as I heard my mum's voice, pretty much, it all came out. And it made me wonder, because what about, all the guilt that you get when you survive something like that. You think, well, I should have done more. You see the newspaper articles the next day where there's a guy who's dragged somebody out the rubble and picked them up and carried them 4 miles to the hospital, and what a hero for doing that. And there was so many of those examples. And you think, well, I should have done more. I should have stayed in the city, and I should have helped, and I didn't, and I should have. And there's huge guilt related to that. And it's funny how we carry that guilt, But over the years, I've sort of worked out how to relieve myself of that guilt, how to forgive myself, which is one of the main things someone would have to do when dealing with trauma, is forgive yourself. And so to reflect on that helped me. It helped me realize that I now know how I respond in an emergency, or how I respond under pressure. And that is, I go into left brain mode, or I go into organized mode, and then I store the emotion, and I deal with it later. And that's all good, but it's also not so good if you don't know how to reaccess that emotion and pull it back out again to actually get it out of you. Because where does it go? If you store it, where does it go? It just gets put in somewhere, compartment somewhere in your brain, and it gets stored in the body. And that then manifests itself physically as pain, or emotionally through mental health issues. So there has to be a release of that emotion somewhere. And so the reflection that I managed to have through that experience really helped me know how I should deal with my mental health and how I should handle my mental health. And it's about self-awareness. It's about self-regulation, understanding, and being okay to actually reflect on how I'm feeling about something, and understand what I'm feeling and how it affects people around me. So that's a quick take on my experience of the earthquake, but also how emotion can store itself in different ways. For me, it was just to lock it away until I was ready to access it. For many, they lock it away, and they lock it away so deep that they can't access it again, and it takes years of work and therapy and deep personal development to get to that emotion, to get it out of them, because it's manifesting in negative ways in their life. So, food for thought, and thank you for listening. Feel free to comment below. I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Christchurch on that day, please like and share this post. I'd like people to hear, my experience, and I want to just thank you for listening. Cheers.